much concerned about being self. Shakespeare's quoted, "To thy own self be true," without deciding which self one is to be. You see, I heard many a woman say, "I must now put on my face." Did you ever hear that? I heard of one who said, "I must now put on my eyes. I must now put on my lips." Well, is one the same person with the new face, new eyes, new lips, without them? Some women need only two things to make them beautiful: soap and water. Others need many other things. I heard of a man who had a choice to marry an opera singer who was very ugly, sang beautifully, and an uneducated cook who was very beautiful. He finally decided that he had better marry the opera singer because she would give him more prestige. So it was decided. First morning after the honeymoon, woke up, took a look at the opera singer, and he said, "For heaven's sake, sing!" See, he had a problem, too, of the identity crisis. Much has been written about it, particularly by Erickson, and he restricted it to some extent to youth. But it is not a phenomenon that belongs to youth alone, this discovery of self. The young indeed have it because the young people do have a terrible crisis. A young person reaches an age where he wants to be himself. He separates from parents. I want to be an individual, but at the same time that he wants to be an individual, he wants to conform to what everyone else is doing. Wear the same clothes, talk the same language, love the same music. But old people have the crisis, too, of discovering which is self. The difference between the young and the old in an identity crisis is that the old in the identity crisis look back to deny the past and responsibility, and the young look to the future and deny the responsibility of the future. So both of them have trouble. Now I'm going to give you three kinds of, well, identity crises. The point is, and this is the reason we've chosen this telecast, is one must be careful in seeking identity to discover which self one really is. And I think that today I will ask my angel to leave all the writing on the blackboard, unless I change my mind, so that you can see the three. The first kind of crisis is this, where a person wears the mask but has no face. That is to say, a perpetual phony. There was someone who wrote a poem some years ago, and the poem was about a woman who was always seen holding a mask before her face. She held it sprightly and gaily. And one day someone pulled away the mask, and there wasn't any face. She was just her sham. So some say they are their true selves when they're only the mask. Take, for example, an alcoholic. An alcoholic is completely identified with his alcohol. He will say, well, this is my nature. I can't help it. It's the way I am. or an LSD victim. They never tried to get below that mask to discover their real self. It was just that made T.S. Eliot, the poet, speak of ourselves as being hollow men, straw men. And he says that when the world ends, the world that's full of hollow men, it will end not with a bang, but with a whimper. Some keep this masquerade, this phoniness, this hypocrisy so much before them that they would hardly recognize their true self if they met it. The Danish philosopher and theologian Kierkegaard told a very interesting story about a peasant who had saved up enough money to buy himself some new boots and new colored stockings. He came into town, bought the boots and the colored stockings. He had some money left, so he got drunk. And he threw himself in the curb. Funny how often drunks end in curbs, isn't it? I heard of one drunk who was walking along with his foot on the curb and the other in the gutter. And the cop came along and said, "You're drunk." He said, "Oh, thank God, I thought I was a cripple." Well, this, I'm sorry I interrupted the story. But at any rate, this drunk threw himself in the curb, and another peasant came along with a cart and horse, and he shouted to the drunk. He says, "Get out of the way. I'll run over you." And the drunk said, "I don't care. They're not my legs." He didn't know himself with his new boots and his new stockings. And he was just so much his old self that he couldn't tell the new. And that's the way people are with the mask without the face. They have no care for others. As Peer Gynt, in the work of Conrad, said, the people are sometimes met in mental institutions. He said they have no care for others. They live in a barrel of self, and they're corked with a bung of self. No concern, no love, no care. Like a priest was telling me some time ago, talking about not caring, about a former pastor years ago that bought a horse. And he said to the farmer, "Can it see all right?" "Oh, yes," he said. "Sees perfectly." "Can it run all right?" "Yes." So he picked up a stone. He threw it at the horse, ran like a racehorse. It ran right into a tree. And the priest said to the farmer, "I thought you said that the horse could see all right." He says he does, but he just doesn't give a darn. Well, that's the way people are. People are that wear the mask but no face. They have no care of others, no love of neighbor. They've lived in this make-believe world so long, and they say, "This is my true identity." That's why one has to be so careful about saying, "I must seek my identity." What kind of identity is one seeking? This kind of mockery has some bad effects. It has psychic effects, which cannot be ignored. There was a German war story told about a Jewish couple who had a son who was paralyzed. And they went to a neighbor and they said to the neighbor, "We are Jews, we're going to be killed by Hitler. But we want you to take care of this paralyzed son of ours. We'll give you this house, we'll give you our property. But just care for him." The neighbor promised to do it. He killed the son, confiscated the property, and lived on it. And then a lump began to appear in the back of his neck. And he would press it, and it would come out on his forehead. And he pressed the forehead, come out on his chest. Press it there, it would come out somewhere else. So though people wear the mask, though they have this kind of makeup, they nevertheless are psychologically disordered on the inside until they discover their true self. But there's another step. And the second step is the mask that knows it has a face, though it is only a subconscious knowledge. See how good my angel is? He doesn't erase today. Remember other times I could go there and write something and immediately he would clean it. Have you ever been able to figure out why he doesn't erase some days? I'm not telling him. The angels are much wiser than men. And they're much wiser than anyone on a television show, too. Well, there's the mask that knows it has a face. I suppose a good example of this kind of identity crisis would be a woman who comes home from a ball, a dance. I didn't mean ball in the modern sense of the word. Dance, and she's been in evening clothes, has on jewels, and her hair was well adorned, and her eyes, maybe her eyelashes made long, and so on and so forth. She comes home, the dance is over, and she sits before the mirror, looks at herself. Maybe she says, I'm beautiful. This is the real me. That's not bad grammar, but that's what she might say. This is the real I. If she were a school teacher, she would say, or came from Boston. And yet she knows that in a little while she's got to take off that makeup. She knows there's a face under that. Maybe she'll put on another kind of face. I heard of a woman who put on so much cold cream and oil that she slid out of bed every night. Sorry. Now, people that are in this state have not discovered their true identity. They suffer from a tension and a pull and a duality between what they seem to be and what they really are. And they know that the mask and the face are not the same. They know the way they appear to others is not the way they are on the inside. Now, what's Freud's explanation of that tension and that anxiety? Well, Freud says people are anxious and unhappy because they wanted to do something and were afraid to do it. Remember his language about the id and the superego? The id, or the instincts and so forth. The id wants to do something and the superego says, no, and crushed it, and they became very anxious. That's not the real reason. People have a tension, people of this kind, have a tension not because they wanted to do something and didn't do it, but because they did something and wish they hadn't, which is very, very different. Now let me give you an example of that, because this is particularly common, this attitude, among the young. A boy and a girl in college went out auto riding. And the boy was telling the girl, you know, it's marvelous how the world has changed. We're now in a universe of great freedom. All the old sex taboos have been done away with. We can put anything we want on the stage today and on television. And furthermore, we do not have to obey any of the old moral laws simply because any of the consequences of sex have been done away with. Psychology has told us not to be worried if we break what was formerly called a moral law. And so he argues and argues with the girl until he finally breaks down her virtue, as he did in this particular historical case. It happened. On the way back, he said, now let me give you a little advice. You must never tell anybody about this. Never. First of all, never tell the man you're going to marry. Don't tell any girls in the dormitory. They won't like you, or they'll be suspicious of you, or they'll tell other boys, and then you'll just become common property among all of them. Then watch yourself. Look out for venereal diseases. All changed. Why did he say one thing on the way out and another thing on the way back? It was the mask on the way out. It was the face on the way back. So people know they have a mask, even when they deny it. And young people, college people at this age will sometimes become very aggressive in defense of the mask. And particularly against parents, when the parents correct them. They become very angry, much more angry than they should, and the reason is they're afraid of exposure. What are the parents going to do, tear off this mask? There are many other characteristics of this age, but I see I have only 6 minutes and 28 seconds to tell you, so we'll not be able to develop it. Then, too, we might also say in this connection, this is a dangerous thing to talk about, and I'm not complaining against social justice. May God grant us all social justice, but it can very well be that sometimes people are interested in social justice to cover up the want of individual justice. They will plead a great love of neighbor in order to cover up a want of true love on the inside. So these are the masks and the face. Now we come to the third and the last. Third and the last stage is where there is a mask and no face. This is identity. Now we come to the real self, but this is hard, to tear off that mask. Tearing off that mask in order to be one's true self, getting rid of all shams and pretenses and make-believes, almost puts one in exactly the same position as the Israelites before they went into the Promised Land. The spies they sent out came back, and they brought news of great abundance. Here were the grapes that were carried on poles by men. This is the fruit and abundance of this Promised Land. But on the other hand, they were told the walls went up to the heavens and the men were giants and as thick as grasshoppers. They wanted to go in, and they were afraid to go in. And so one wants to tear away the mask, and one is afraid to do it. But the moment one becomes unacceptable to self, that's the point. Unacceptable to self, one begins to be very acceptable to God. This was brought out very well, remember, in the woman taken in sin. Here the Pharisees had found the woman in adultery, so they said. Just think of the snooping that went on, huh? To have caught this woman in adultery. And here they bring her to our Lord. They said she should be stoned, which was indeed the Mosaic law. So was he going to be just and have her stoned, or was he going to be merciful? If he was merciful, he would disobey the law. What did he say? He said, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And he began to write. What we wrote, we do not know. But he looked at them. I think he looked at one of them through the mask. And he wrote the word thief. Looked at another, wrote the word murderer. Looked at another, tore off the mask, and wrote adulterer. And they left. They left one by one, beginning with the eldest. That's interesting. It was the older men who first tore off the masks, not the young. The old are more convertible, evidently. The old have passed through so much sham, they're ready to get rid of it. And then he said to the woman, woman, where are they that accuse thee? She said, they are not here, my Lord. And he said, neither will I. Neither will I accuse thee. So her mask was torn away, and so was their mask. Let the young, therefore, who are seeking true identity, be sure of the identity that they seek, that it's not a mask, and they'll never discover their real self until they've gone through the troubling of the waters. It's only then that paralyzed souls are cured, like Augustine. And then it is, when the mask is off, that one can say with Augustine, our hearts are restless, and they cannot find peace until they rest in thee, O Lord.
Bishop Sheen will return in a moment.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees.
How long does time seem to last? Do you know how long I have now to say goodbye to you? Seconds? Boys, that's where your mother ate us, out of house and home. Then as the centuries went on, man found it rather difficult to be without a woman. G.K. Chesterton could hardly keep an engagement without his wife. One time he sent a telegram to her that read, I'm in Manchester, dear, where ought I be?
The level of any civilization is always the level of its womanhood. And the reason is, when we know something, we always bring it down to our own level. That is why we have to explain things to children, by bringing it down to the level of their minds. But when we love something, we always have to go out to meet it. For example, if we love music, we have to meet the demands of music. If we study a foreign language, we have to follow its laws. Even if we study ping pong, we have to meet its requirements too. Now, inasmuch as woman is loved, it follows that the nobler a woman is, the nobler man will have to be deserving of that love. That is why the level of any civilization is always the level of its womanhood. And women who do not fail can be broken down into three different categories. Those that cover, first of all, the women who do not fail in the social, political, and economic order. Secondly, women who do not fail in the home. And thirdly, women who do not fail in their preservation of spiritual values for civilization. First of all, women who do not fail in the social, political, and economic order. That immediately brings up this question. Does professional life harden a woman? It is sometimes asserted that it does. This is not true. There's nothing in professional life to harden any woman. Does it happen, however, that women in professional life sometimes do become hard? Yes, but that is due to other factors. A woman becomes hard only when she loses an opportunity to manifest those specifically feminine qualities of sympathy and kindness and tenderness. Every woman in the world was made to be a mother, either physically or spiritually. And here we're not talking of physical motherhood, we're speaking of spiritual motherhood. A woman in professional life is happy when she has an occasion to be feminine. The man is the guardian of nature, but a woman is the custodian of life. And therefore, in whatever she does, she has to have some occasion to be kind and merciful to others. She cannot look at a limping dog. She cannot look at a flower that has a broken stem without her heart and her mind and her hands going out to these things as if to bear witness that she was appointed by God as the very guardian, the custodian of life. The woman who does not fail in professional life is the woman, therefore, who manifests this feminine quality of what we will call equity. There's a world of difference between law and equity. Law is concerned with rules, with exactness, with justice. Equity, there are not many more courts of equity. The world used to be full of courts of equity. Equity is concerned with the circumstances that escape law, with extenuating circumstances, excuses for action. Equity always finds some reason for not being too strict and too rigorous. And it used to be, as Henry Adams pointed out in that great work of his on Mont Saint-Michel, there used to be a reverence for all of the ladies of equity. He tells the story of the Cathedral of Chartres. And he pictures on one side of this great cathedral magnificent windows that were put up by one of the great families of France, the family of Blanche of Castile. And then on the other side of this cathedral were another set of windows that were put up by the family of Pierre Dreux. They almost seemed to be carrying on the Civil War across the vault of that cathedral. And Henry Adams said, there on the main altar, there stood the statue of Our Lady of Equity, listening, as it were, to the disputes, but with mercy and kindness and tenderness, symbolized by the holding of a babe in her arms. She was reconciling the conflicting parties. And if a woman does not have an opportunity in her working hours between 9 and 5 to manifest those feminine qualities of tenderness and meekness and gentleness, then she will have to find occasion afterwards. That is to say, from 5 o'clock on. Then she keeps normal. Then she keeps feminine. Then she keeps happy. I was thinking the other day why we have such a very happy office. I think the reason is that everybody who is there has an opportunity, though they're doing somewhat the same work that is done in every other great office in America, typing, mailing letters, receiving letters, and the like. They're happy because they know that everything they do is associated with helping, as we did last year, 63 million sick and orphans and aged and lepers throughout the world. It's a wonderful sensation to enter into any kind of work and to realize that you know that mankind is better simply because you made some contribution, even in a commercial way. Women of this kind are always happy. Here are the women who do not fail. And then there's the second type of woman who does not fail, and that is the mother. Here we speak of physical motherhood. The mother and the wife. Every mother is the bearer of God's gifts to man. She adds a new dimension to the love of husband and wife. She does most in the production of what is actually the mutual incarnation of the love of husband and wife, namely a child. And then there comes mothercraft, or the teaching of obedience to children. We hardly ever hear of obedience anymore in our modern world. And yet obedience is the condition of wisdom. And mothers who do not fail to be mothers always teach their children wisdom through obedience. Now, how is that done? Well, take a scientist. A scientist, if he's ever to know nature, has to sit passively before it. He does not give nature its laws. He says to nature, here I am sitting before you. You teach me. I will learn from you. To just the extent that he is obedient, he is wise about the laws of nature. And then when he has the laws of nature in his own mind, then he can convert them into technical power, into the progress of civilization. And so it is with a child. When a child is obedient, he learns wisdom. Not only the wisdom that comes from the experience of parents, but the wisdom that comes from the moral and religious training they give their children, but also the wisdom that comes from tradition, for the family is that which perpetuates the tradition. When the child has finally acquired that wisdom by obedience, then later on, he can use that wisdom for his own perfection and out of his own freedom, but he has to obey first. And the real mother who does not fail is in relationship to her child like a wheat field is in relationship to a grain of wheat. That grain of wheat is normal, it's sane. Why? Because it's rooted, it's fixed in tradition. It's in communion with the earth and communion with the sun and the stars and the rain. And if you take that grain of wheat out of that field before it is ripe, it acquires an independence which is its death. And so it is with a child. When a child is uprooted from the wisdom and the tradition and the love and the obedience of a home, the child is like that grain of wheat that has been pulled up, unripe. And he begins to acquire an importance which actually he does not have, because he's not yet ripe. He's not yet wise with obedience. And because there are so many children in our modern world that have been uprooted without mothers of that particular kind, they insist on speaking to their elders before they have learned. They are asked to speak on international and social problems before they have learned that great wisdom that comes from obedience and a knowledge of tradition. They command before they have learned to obey. The mother who does not fail, setting certain limitations for her children, the limitations of love, finds the children happy, just as a child is happy playing in a rock at sea when there's a wall around the sea. He has some roots. Mothers of this kind, who teach the children this kind of obedience, are the mothers who will raise the great citizens for a great America of tomorrow. And then there is the third. And they are the women who preserve the great spiritual values for civilization. It is rather difficult to tell precisely everyone in a complete way just what they do for the world. But there must be someone in the world, some women, who will preserve ideals, so that there will always be ideals to which every man can look when he loves a woman. And they are those women who dedicate and consecrate themselves in virginal lives to the love of God. They are like soldiers. Who does most to preserve patriotism in a nation? It is not the politician who talks about the country. It is not the dramatist who writes about it. Those who do most to preserve the ideals of patriotism in a nation are the soldiers on battlefields who are prepared to die if need be, in order to manifest to other citizens that other values are unnecessary, that other values are unimportant compared to the great love of country. Now, should there not be women who will do for love what soldiers do for patriotism? Should there not be some women who will love divine love so deeply and so profoundly that they will sacrifice all lesser loves in order to preserve for a weak and sinful and possibly sex-minded world, the real understanding of love. They keep it pure. We can readily understand why any young woman, for example, should love a human heart that decays. It seems very hard for some to understand why anyone should love the divine heart. Everybody can understand why anyone should love the spark. There are very few who understand why anyone should love the flame. Perhaps we could make it clear in an example. Here's a rose. This rose has its own father, its own mother, its own hopes and aspirations for the future. When there was rain, it had its own tears. When there was sunshine, it had its own smile. And out into the garden there came a hand and plucked up that rose and destroyed it as far as its rose environment was concerned. But there was no injustice done, because the hand of man is above the rose and he may use it for his own purposes. So in a human family is a human rose, with his own real father and mother, brothers and sisters, hopes and aspirations for the future, own real laughter and own real tears. And from out high heaven there comes the hand of the heavenly gardener that reaches down to that young woman and plucks her up and destroys her life as far as human environment is concerned. There's no injustice done. For the hand of man is above the rose, and the hand of God is above the soul. And he may solicit a human heart to a perfect love. But you ask, well, what favor and blessing ever accrues to the rose that is plucked? Well, this rose that is plucked is touched by human hands. It may even be pressed to human lips. It may even be privileged to crimson, to lay its crimson head alongside of the lady of love. Rose life is shortened, yes, but what a beautiful life it now begins to lead with man, so you all can see it. And so this young human life that is plucked is put into the vase. Consecration, service, and love of God, and refreshing waters of sanctifying grace are poured on it from day to day. Its human life is shortened, yes, but what a beautiful life begins to lead with God, so that all the world may know that here are lovers. Lovers with what Thompson has called a passionless passion, a wild tranquility, to be in love with God. These are the women who do not fail. And it is interesting, if you ever noticed it, that in the great crises, the greatest crisis that ever faced the life of our blessed Lord, there were many instances of men failing, but there was not a single instance of a woman failing. Peter denied. Judas blistered his lips with a kiss. As regards women, some women solaced him on the way to Calvary. A woman made her way into Pilate's courtroom to plead his case. A woman wiped his face on the road to Calvary and became known as Veronica, Veronicon, the true image. And then at the foot of the cross, there were 3 women. Their names were the same. Their names, Mary. Mary Magdalene, Mary of Cleophas, Mary of Nazareth, the mother of the Savior. They are the three women we described. They symbolize the three. Mary Magdalene. The woman symbolizes those that takes hold of the tangled skeins of a seemingly wrecked and ruined life and weaves out of it the beautiful tapestry of saintliness and holiness, and therefore the type of woman who goes into the political, economic, and social order and regenerates the downtrodden and heals the wounds of those who are sick of heart. And then there was Mary of Cleophas, the mother of James, the mother who taught obedience to a son, and obedience that was such that he became obedient even to the wisdom that was the word. And then finally there was Mary the contemplative, who left the lights and glamours of the world for the shades and shadows of the cross, where saints are made. These are the women who do not fail, and we salute them, we toast them, not as the modern woman, once our superior, now our equal, but we toast them as the great women who never fail, the women who are closest to the cross on Good Friday and first at the tomb on Easter morn.
People of all faiths recognize Bishop Fulton J. Sheen as one of the greatest communicators of the 20th century. He was born in El Paso, Illinois, in May of 1896. As a young boy, he knew he wanted to be a priest. He served as an altar boy at St. Mary's Cathedral in Peoria, Illinois. At St. Viator College, his education and debating skills taught him the skills he used throughout his life. His unique ability at being natural and at ease in front of any audience was noted early in his ministry. He was ordained in 1919 and went on to become one of the best-known and greatly loved priests in church history. He wrote 96 books and hundreds of articles
Side to the military than what we're going to show. And so let me pick up just a few little stories about soldiers before we get into the story of war. I remember at the close of the last World War, there was one soldier coming back from Europe on a ship, and he passed the Statue of Liberty as he came into the New York harbor. And he saluted it, and he said, "Lady, if you want to see me again, you'll have to turn around." I heard too of another soldier who was fighting in one of our more recent wars, which we'll not mention. And the commanding officer said to him, "This is a dangerous assignment. We're outnumbered 4-1, so fight." About a half hour later, he found this soldier leaning up against a tree, sleeping. He woke him up. He says, "Why aren't you fighting?" He said, "I killed my 4." I had a cousin whose husband was fighting across the sea in a war. He was a sailor, and he sent to her a photograph in which there were a number of sailors. And in the letter he said, "We're all going out to have a good time." Well, this friend of the family was with her and was looking at the photograph. And she got a magnifying glass. And she looked at the pictures of the sailors through the magnifying glass, finally satisfied herself, and sat down and wrote a letter to her husband. And it took her only 15 seconds to write it. This friend said, "Is that all you're going to write?" "Yes," she said, "that's all. Read it." Do you know what the letter said? "Where's your wedding ring?" At that checkpoint Charlie between East and West Berlin, there are all kinds of stories that are told, and one American soldier pulled a gag on the Russians, who were watching very carefully.
anyone who passed from one side to the other. Generally, the military could pass without much of an inspection. This particular day, this soldier was evidently concealing something, and he had his overcoat bunched in front of him, and the Russian said to him, "What have you got under your overcoat?" He opened it, and there were hundreds of little Russian dolls about that high. And the Russian said, "What are you doing with those?" He said, "These are dehydrated people, and when I get on the other side, I fill them up with water. It's the only way we can smuggle them out of Russia." There was at that same checkpoint, it seems, a man that every day for about a year was passing the checkpoint going into East Germany. And in his wheelbarrow, he had hay piled up about 6 or 8 feet high. And each day, the Russian let him pass. So, being naturally quick after 300 days, he said, "You must be smuggling something in." So he tore all the hay off the wheelbarrow. He said, "What are you smuggling in?" He said, "Wheelbarrows." Now, that's the lighter side. Now the serious side, and this is really serious. We're going to talk about various phases of war, and first of all, the rapidity of wars. How often do they come? I would advise you to get a pencil and write down some of these figures. Have you got your pencil? Now, here is the rapidity of some of the great wars of modern times with which we are very familiar. The rapidity between the Napoleonic and the Franco-Prussian War was 55 years. The interval between the Franco-Prussian War and World War I was 43. And the interval between World War I and World War II was 21 years. At a time when man has more and more the material conditions for happiness, he's multiplying wars. There has been a war every 2.6 years of recorded human history. Of 185 generations, human generations, there have only been 10. Just think of it. 10 out of 185 generations that have ever lived in warless days. Now, another way of looking at this is to take a bigger sweep. I don't want to make my angel work too hard. He's on union rules, and so I'm going to conserve his washings today. I'm going to give you the rapidity of wars in various nations in the last 500 years. How many times, for example, did Great Britain go to war in the last 500 years? 76 times. How many times did France go to war in the last 500 years? 61 times. How many times did Russia go to war? 63 times. Now, our history is not nearly that long, in that in our time there were 9 major wars. That for the rapidity of wars. That's not a superstition. There's a logic behind everything. As regards wars, we must speak of their tactics as well. And the most clever of all the nations today is Russia. Why is Russia more clever than any other nation, and particularly the United States? Well, when the United States goes to war, first of all, sends its armaments, its weaponry, and then it sends men. So we are really at war. What does Russia do? Russia sends its weapons, but not its men. It sends the guns, airplanes, cannons, and bombers. It keeps the Russians at home. It finds dupes in other nations to do the fighting. That is why, when any other nation goes to war, Russia can always appear as the lover of peace. And why? It hasn't any men fighting. It just has guns fighting. Russians don't kill anyone. It's only their machines that kill. This is something we must keep in mind whenever we hear talk of peace. Now, as regards peace, what hope are we to find in leagues of nations, United Nations, and so forth? Certainly we must have them. But it's well to go back and just ask ourselves, how successful are peace treaties? Between World War I and World War II, when we had the League of Nations, do you think that nations were interested in peace? Certainly they were. So they were busy signing treaties of peace. We'll not go to war. How many treaties of peace did they sign? 4,568 treaties of peace between World War I and World War II. And the year before World War II started, how many treaties of peace? 211. In other words, there is not much confidence to be put in the pledged word. You get one divorce for every 4 marriages, and you get broken international agreements too. Now that's the relationship of peace to war. Now we come to the title of this telecast. How much does it cost to kill a man in war? Now the cost is going to vary, of course, as time goes on. But let's go back to the beginning. The first war certainly didn't cost very much. I mean, the war between Cain and Abel, all he had to do was just simply pull a branch off a tree and crack Abel over the head. Then the next weapon was a sword by Lamech. That probably cost a few cents in those days. But these were just wars between individuals. David fought Goliath, 5 stones and a slingshot. Now we come to some figures that were given to us by a Admiral Eccles, who made a study of this subject. You remember in high school when you studied the wars of Julius Caesar? Remember, all Gaul was divided into 3 parts. And remember his campaigns into Britain and to what is now France. How much did it cost Julius Caesar to kill a man? Are you guessing? $0.75. How much did it cost Napoleon sweeping through Europe? $700 a man. How much did it cost World War I? $21,000. Despite the fact that this was done on a wholesale scale. How much did it cost World War II to kill a man? $200,000. How much does it cost to kill a man? What did it cost to kill a man in Vietnam? Here, it's a little different standard. It cost $1 million an hour. $1 million an hour. Suppose there are 24 men killed in a day. That's cost $1 million apiece. So you do your own arithmetic from this point on. And just read the number of men that are killed in any one day and divide that into 24 million, then you have your cost. What is our budget now for war? For war. $77 billion. $77 billion. How much for the reconstruction of our cities? $5 billion. Those are figures now that you can digest. Just think of how that money could be spent in other ways. Maybe in another telecast, we will give you some of the ways. Why do we keep it up? Well, fundamentally because there's a tremendous amount of selfishness. And also because there is probably, in our modern civilization, a great death wish. And today we're getting jittery. Jittery about what? Oh, about nuclear energy. Throwing the earth off its axis. One single explosion. In 1949, Einstein was asked, "What do you think is the future of atomic energy?" He says, "Come back in 1969 and I will tell you." What was he thinking about? We're now at a stage in weaponry where one maniac can press a button. Nations are wiped out. Maybe the planet destroyed. Just a jittery man can do it. It happened once before. In the legend of the death of King Arthur, he and his son, Mordred, quarreled, then became bitter enemies. They organized armies. Kingdom was divided. Thousands of men lined up on either side. On these two opposing hills stood the army, one led by Arthur, the father, and the other by Mordred, the son. They looked at one another and they thought, what are we going to do? Kill one another? Kill thousands? So they decided to sue for peace. Mordred and Arthur, with a few dozen soldiers from each side, met in the valley. And they agreed on a treaty of peace. And just as they were about to sign the treaty of peace, a poisonous snake wrapped itself around the leg of one of the soldiers. He took out his sword, cut away the snake. The blade of the sword flashed in the sun, and the men on both sides thought that war was declared. And they rushed at one another. And there were only 4 survivors. They had a case of jitters. Somebody had pressed a button. Is there much difference between the
flash of a blade in the sunlight, the flash of the energy that has been Promethean-like stolen from the sun. May God avert the possibility of jittery men and the abuse of an energy that should be used for peace and not war.
Bishop Sheen will return in a moment.